The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for DB Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. In this episode, we're lucky to be joined by a titan of the titanium industry. Our guest today got started with titanium in the late 1950s, working directly in R&D through the 60s and 70s, rising to the rank of Vice President of Research and Technical Development at RMI Titanium in Ohio, and rounding out his distinguished career as a consultant for the International Titanium Association. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Stan Seagle. Stan, would you mind telling us how you got your start in the titanium industry?
Yes, I was doing graduate work at Purdue University in the 1950s, and I had a professor there that wanted to leave and asked if I would go with him to Niles, Ohio, that they wanted to try to produce titanium there. It's an old steel mill. And there was a time in the industry where the Air Force had determined that to go from prop planes to jet planes, they needed something like titanium. And as a result, the government poured all kinds of money into the process to get titanium available for that application in particular. And as a result, there was a lot of need for technical people because it had not been produced for any use at that particular time. So I went there and really was involved in the research portion of it and trying to develop alloys, understand titanium, and produce them on a mill.
And how long did you do that?
Well, I was probably in research for maybe 15, 20 years. And then I went into a marketing position, to try to use titanium in other applications. We only had an aerospace application for many years. As I said, it started with jet engines, and gradually titanium went into airframes in military, and then eventually it went into use in commercial airplanes. And right now that's probably 50% of the US market, but 50% of it's used in non-aerospace now. And that was where we were trying to get to diversify the industry at that time. So that's why I went into a market development position. And after I was there for a while, I was raised to vice president of technology, and I had a production group with me, a research group under me, and things of that nature. And we were one of probably 3 titanium industries that survived the years. And in the early 1990s, we were owned by US Steel and National Distillers, and they wanted to sell us, and they wanted to do it by going public. So we went public as a company, and we were on the New York Stock Exchange in the early 1990s. And I stayed on for about 4 or 5 years. And after that, in approximately 1994, I decided to retire for several reasons. One being I had a large family and I wanted to spend more time with it. And they were well scattered throughout the country. And I thought maybe I could do reasonably well just as a consultant and pass my time doing that. And I did. I consulted with the company I was with for many years, for about 10 years. And then I became really a consultant to the International Titanium Association. which is association of all the producers in the country and in the world, actually. Started it just in the country, but it's worldwide. And I developed a course there for titanium, which I gave approximately 20 or 30 times a year throughout the world, all the way Europe, Africa, Asia, and of course, a lot of times in the United States. And I did that for about 20 years. Then I decided it was time just to quit and really retire. So, and that's where I've been since then.
That's quite an impressive resume. There's probably not many people on the planet that know much more about titanium than you. Would you say that's fair to say?
I basically, so I think I was used as a consultant in Titanium Association, primarily because of my background and also because of availability as a consultant. So, yeah, I've been in it a long time, and I understand primarily the technology as well as the markets. I don't keep up to them like I used to because I've been retired from the teaching for about 10 years.
But you were directly involved with the research and development process with titanium and titanium alloys in the 1960s.
Yes, I was. One of my primary requirements was to develop new alloys. And I have several patents related to alloys, titanium alloys, and we were also in the zirconium business for a while and also developed some zirconium alloys. And that was what was happening in the industry because you have a new industry in the 50s and there was an immediate market for it in aerospace, and we had to find the best combination of alloying elements for titanium. So there was a lot of effort throughout the United States and overseas in Russia and England primarily to develop new titanium alloys or improved alloys from what we had in the 50s and 60s.
Have you ever heard the name Milton Bordal?
Yes, I didn't know him personally. He was with a competitor, Remcrew Titanium, and I knew of him because of his work. We knew pretty much, it was a small industry. We knew pretty much most of the people that were working in the industry, at least as far as our competitors. And he worked with one of our competitors. I can't recall if I ever met him. I may have met him at a technical meeting of some type, but I don't remember.
Have you ever heard any rumors on how he was to work with?
No, just what a few things I've read about it. I do. That got me thinking about in 1960s, another man that was working with Milt called Howard Baumberger moved to RMI, the company I was with at that time, and into the research area. And I often wondered why he left Remcrew, but I have a feeling he probably didn't get along with the people that were there, would be my guess.
Have you ever heard of the name DB Cooper?
Yes, I have.
Do you remember when that incident happened?
Yes, I do. I remember it, but I didn't associate it in any way with titanium, so it was just a passing interest.
Have you ever been interested in that case at all?
Yes, over the years, I probably had at least 2 contacts from people related to that. At one time, there was some people that thought that the individual that Cooper was actually apparently spoke French, and that maybe, and I think that's because they thought he was from Canada, and that he might have worked at our plant in Ashtabula, Ohio. But we didn't have anybody that we knew that fit that particular area. So that was a quick answer to that particular case. And then it was not too long ago, I would say around 2012 in that area, there was a convention of the titanium industry in Chicago. And we had speakers come to talk about the Cooper story and made a presentation. I don't remember totally their names. One of them worked at the University of Chicago, and another one was from a lab in the Chicago area.
Okay, and what did you think of that presentation?
Well, it was a good presentation, and it was a good group to talk with because we had a, it was odd. They didn't allow them on the main program, but we did a boat excursion out on Lake Michigan and people were invited on that. And they were invited to talk on that excursion. And but what was interesting is not only did you have people like me that were a producer of titanium, and that's my main area, but we had people from Boeing there and other aircraft industries. And so there was a small group of us, 4 or 5, that talked to them after their presentation.
Was there discussion on sort of what environment was this tie in?
Yeah, that was basically what they were looking for. And the one misconception they had at that time was, well, first I have to go back and tell you the market at the time that Cooper incident occurred, there were really only 2 titanium alloys. One was pure titanium, nothing alloyed with it. And the other was with titanium 6% aluminum 4 vanadium. And they thought that some of the particles just contained basically titanium, which confused them. But there was a market for pure titanium, and there were some parts on airplanes made from pure titanium, which is a low strength alloy, low strength material for compared to 6 aluminum 4 vanadium, and there were places where titanium is used because of its corrosion resistance and lightweight. They don't need the strength, and that's where they were used on the aircraft, pure titanium. So there were people fabricating things and welding titanium on the West Coast, and there could be particles that could have gotten from that particular process if somebody was welding and joining. And very often they grind titanium, and grinding you would probably put some particles in the air. With somebody's walking by, they might pick them up.
What sort of environment do you believe that tie was in?
Well, when I look at all the elements there, I can't come up with anything that makes sense. I'm sort of amazed at the number of alloying elements that are there, or potential alloying elements and alloys. It really, my first inclination was that guy must have worn that tie for years and years. And I think at that time you usually never cleaned or washed a tie, so maybe that's why it's that way. I don't know.
The tie could be as old as 1963.
Yeah, and well, it's you would wear a tie like that occasionally if you were in sort of the management of any company at that time, and we often did, because I remember wearing a tie and jacket at work. We'd take the jacket off as soon as we got to work, but that was common at that time, not so much anymore.
Did you wear a clip-on tie?
No, I never wore a clip-on tie. I know people wear them for safety purposes sometimes, but I never felt the need to do that, and nor were there any requirements to do it. But I wasn't always out in the mill. The mill is what would be the dangerous place to work with titanium. If there's going to be an accident or something could happen, and more equipment. But in the lab, you don't have quite the same environment. It's more controlled environment.
Would technicians, from your experience, would technicians directly handling titanium at the mill, would they be wearing a tie or a clip-on tie?
Only in the research. Well, no, they didn't wear, not even in research. And we worked, and I'm sure most of them did. We had a group of engineers, and we had a lot of technicians that really did all the legwork for us, and all the handling of titanium. And none of them I can recall ever would wear a tie.
Just kind of like Levi's and a work shirt kind of thing?
Whatever they wanted to wear, basically. Yeah. Yes. No, they never would wear a tie.
All right, I'm going to get into some crazy titanium questions. Most of them come from other people, and I'd like everyone listening to know that I know nothing about this subject, and I'm a total clown when it comes to this. So if I ask a dumb question or pronounce something wrong, you got to give me a little bit of forgiveness on this.
Okay.
All right, so you ready for the hardcore stuff, Stan?
Okay, Go ahead, shoot.
So the Thai era, like I said, would span from about 1963 to November of 71. What do you think would be the most common explanation for the large amounts of pure titanium and or titanium alloys
On the tie,
on the Thai?
I can see several places that you could get it. Let's start back with the basic process. The basic process is deals with titanium oxide to begin with. So you might get titanium oxide from the processing of the original ore. That go eventually we take the oxygen away to get to the metal. And so you have that, and you process it with sodium or magnesium. So you might find sodium and magnesium associated with pure titanium. And also those came in as sodium chloride and magnesium chloride. So you look for those type of things. If it's in the basic reduction process, those are the elements that would be there, would be magnesium chloride, sodium chloride, titanium chloride, but I don't think you'd find that. It's not that stable, and titanium. Now, what's interesting and a question to always ask is if there is a titanium particle, you want to know if it's spherical or if it has a different shape. Because in the reduction process, it never gets molten. So it's not going to be spherical in nature, any of the particles that come off. But they're a circular, which is a different shape. And so that's always important. And what they're analyzing is the shape of the particle that they're analyzing. And I didn't see anything in the information I have that relates to that portion of it. But that's in the reduction process. And then when you go from the reduction process, we go to, we get out of that a spongy-like particle, which is titanium. And it looks like a little piece of sponge. It may be only about an inch or so in diameter. That goes to a mill, and they mix it with alloying elements. If it's aluminum and vanadium, they mix it with that. It depends on what the requirements are. And they compact that all up and melt it in a big furnace. And when I say big furnace, they end up with 10,000 pounds of titanium coming out of that furnace or more. And in the process of melting, you open crucibles and things like that, and there's dust that come out, and there's probably some of it's titanium, and probably some of it goes back to the oxide. See, titanium wants to always go back to the oxide, if possible. If it's warm enough, it will, or hot enough. So the melting process, you would see some particles floating around in the mill. And it's always very, very dusty in the mill. It's so many particles around. They have a sweeper that went through our mill. And when it get too much titanium, it sometimes would catch on fire because it was going back, a reaction occurred and it was going back to the oxide, its natural form. So there would be titanium particles in the mill. And not only from the melting, but the whole process of titanium getting to a component that can be sent to a fabricator, getting a piece of sheet or a bar or something like that. You go through all kinds of processes where there could be titanium dust or titanium, and it may convert to oxide, it may not. So there's going to be all kinds of titanium dust throughout a titanium mill. They try to keep it clean, but it would be there. So that's in the production of the product. And then when somebody buys what comes out of these mills, like Tymet and Rim Crew at that time, and our company, which is now, I think, RMI. It's changed its name so many times, I have a hard time keeping up with it. But we end up sending it to a fabricator. That could be a forging house. It could be somebody that's going to bend a part into a formation and things like that. And all these people that handle titanium, they have the chance of creating dust of titanium. So, and there are a lot of forging houses, a lot of people, even at that time, there are a lot of people involved in titanium. And an interesting fact to show you the extent of the industry in that period of time, when the Defense Department decided They needed titanium. They set out contracts, and the total value of those contracts were more than the atomic bomb when even adjusted for inflation.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
It's a yes. So that means it's going everywhere because we had to, they would tell companies, and DuPont was one, and there were a lot of them, we'll buy the product out of it if you make it. And they had a set price. And they could easily get a contract to produce a lot of titanium to get it going. They wanted everybody working on it. And then once you have a product, the aerospace industry has to test it, and that's not cheap. So you can see that there was a lot going on in those years. But it's also interesting, and you mentioned 59 to what year now?
It would be about 63 to 71.
63 to 71. Okay. Yeah, what happened with the industry is in 59, there was an event that occurred that changed the industry. And that event was Sputnik. The first, the Russians put up in going around the Earth. And the Air Force all of a sudden decided airplanes weren't all that important. that they were more interested in rockets, and there was no titanium in rockets. So there was sort of a depression in that industry until things sort of began to change around and eventually took off. But there were 3 or 4 years that were very, very tough years because the government just changed their mind. They didn't need airplanes because they're going to need rockets. So, but they finally decided they need airplanes, and there was a lot of titanium in the airplanes.
A lot of the particles a lot of the metallic particles on the tie have around 0% or some very low level of oxygen. What does that say?
If it's very low, it's not titanium dioxide. I have to say, and I didn't mention earlier, as far as titanium is concerned, the biggest use of titanium is titanium dioxide. And the major producer at that time was DuPont. And so it was used to replace lead oxide in paint. And that was a big market. So, but if there's a lot of oxygen, it could be titanium dioxide. If there's very little, there is a little oxygen normally just in titanium. So that would not surprise me to find some oxygen in titanium. It's almost like an alloying element, but it's very low. Like steel has carbon, titanium has oxygen, has somewhat a similar effect. So a small amount doesn't mean a whole lot at this point in titanium. We'd expect it maybe.
Okay, would there anything be special about something where it's 0% oxygen?
Yeah, that's unlikely. I would question the chemical analysis on that.
Really? Why is that?
Well, because I can't visualize it being zero. The amount of oxygen that's in pure titanium is around 0.08%, somewhere in that area. It could be higher, it could be but that's probably one of the lowest, or 0.04%. So there's always oxygen because you can't get titanium without some oxygen in it, just by the process that it's made. And oxygen gives it some strength too. So sometimes they don't take the oxygen out.
What would be the most common explanations for total pure metallic elements found on the tie? We find 100% silicon, calcium, iron, antimony, nickel, titanium, aluminum, gold, etc. Does the fact that we find pure metals suggest further that he was working for the things at a base level in R&D and point us away from manufacturing?
Yeah, that's very possible because I know in our R&D we had all kinds of alloying elements that we used. Because in the process of R&D, in order to evaluate alloys, you only had to make like a pound of material, and you did it in the little furnaces. And so we were always making all kinds of crazy alloys and trying to develop new alloys using elements, some of them that I see there, but titanium can easily be alloyed, and there is another market I don't think anybody's talked about that's sort of interesting, because sometimes there's iron, I noticed, with the titanium, and it's not a major, it's a major market, I guess, but it's a significant market, is they make ferrotitanium. Ferrotitanium is a material that's about 50% titanium, 50% iron. And that's used in the steel industry to add titanium to steel. Some steels have a small amount of titanium, very small amount, and they use an alloy of such. And there are companies that make ferrotitanium.
Is there any uniqueness to which industries would utilize powdered metallurgy? Many of the metallic particles observed manually appear to have a spherical shape, and many of the particles contain several different metals, sometimes up to 8. Do these factors make powdered metallurgy more likely a source of the metals?
Yeah, titanium has been evaluated in powder metallurgy, where you have to start with powders there. That means somebody is producing powders in order to make powder metallurgy parts. And that's popular now. It was not so much popular at that time at all. But there were a few companies that made small components out of pure titanium powders. Wasn't used in most applications, but there was a company in Cleveland, Clevite, I think was its name or something. They made titanium powder parts. So they would have, but they may not necessarily be spherical in nature. Our plant in Ohio made pure titanium powders, and they were circular. They weren't round at all. And those powders were used quite a bit in that period of time. Or when I say quite a bit, I mean for the small market that was there, very small.
It has been suggested that a possible explanation for particles containing high amounts of titanium and no oxygen are actually particles from smoldered match heads and not titanium alloys.
I'm not sure what meant by match heads.
Like a strike anywhere match?
No, I don't think, I've never heard that. I have a hard time visualizing that. I don't know where it came from.
It's just theories we've floated in this DB Cooper
Yeah,
community. So you got to be patient with me. Like I said, I'm kind of a wacko. So,
I
all right. There is an extremely high proportion of metallic particles on the tie around where the knot would have commonly touched it. It's currently believed that this suggests the primary transfer of particles was by touch. Does the transfer of particles by touch, rather than being airborne from machinery, suggest anything about what type of work he performed?
If people working in the mill, and actually people working in locations that fabricate components, I imagine the individuals touching titanium quite a bit, and there would be potentially titanium, small particles of titanium even on the surface of the material. But that I would assume most people wore gloves working with the material. We did in our plant, but yeah, that sounds interesting. But I'm trying to visualize that's would be an easy way of transferring it. I don't know. I can't help you much on that.
What are the benefits, if any, to alloying titanium with antimony?
Yeah, antimony, I think, is in the group with tin on the periodic table, and which would be similar. And my guess is that we didn't do that at our company. We didn't try that. We tried all kinds of things. I would guess that it was merely an attempt to see if they got unique properties they couldn't get by other means, because I'm not sure of the pricing on antimony. It's maybe may have been too expensive to really add unless there was really tremendous benefits. But so I don't, based on my knowledge, it's something I would think wouldn't be particularly beneficial when you can add, for example, tin, which is very similar to that metal. But I haven't really looked at antimony. Now, talking about alloy development, just going to another subject, one company that was involved was the research labs in Columbus, Ohio, that did all kinds of work on titanium and titanium alloys. And I'm not sure when they ended that development. They had a lot of government contracts, and they could have been playing with almost anything, because they were trying to add everything to titanium and get patents, not even knowing if they were going to be useful or not. But that was what was going on at that time. You try everything and you hoping that one of them will hit. And that was Battelle Memorial Institute, which is still there. And they did a lot of research in titanium in about that time. They started in the 50s and then went into the 60s. I don't know when they gradually got out of it, but they were one that would have had all kinds of things around in the lab.
In metals R&D, how common would it be to tinker with new alloy combinations and not document your findings in a patent?
If you really came up with something valuable in you saw an immediate application for it, you would probably patent it. That was our approach to it. But one of the reasons that you wanted to get patents on alloys in the industry is that your competitors were going to get patents on alloys. They may not be the same one, but because you have patents and they have patents, you could come to a close agreement on sharing. But if you're not doing any patent work and they have a patent that it looks very good, you're going to end up paying a lot of money to utilize their technology. So it was also a defensive means of protecting yourself against competitors coming up with materials that had great properties and you weren't doing anything that you could offer to them.
But let's say I happen to be tinkering with titanium with a high percentage of antimony, and my end product, I'm like, this is no good. Would you patent that, or would that researcher probably just throw that away?
I think there was always an attempt to patent those things because they probably saw some benefit. And usually those patents covered a wide range of compositions and other additions at the same time, and not everything they tested, but there was a tendency to patent everything you could. We did that, and I think everybody else did too.
In metals R&D, do you think anyone would be, this is a very subjective question, but do you think anyone would be in a dire financial situation?
At that time?
At that time. Was the money pretty good?
No, those were sort of lean years in the industry. And probably somewhere in that's one reason I went out of the research lab into marketing, because we were trying to find new applications for titanium. And because aerospace sort of was good, but it had sort of reached a peak at that time. And we wanted more applications because we had the capacity. Basically the industry was very cyclic. And there would be good years and there would be a lot of bad years, but you'd have a couple good years and then you have many bad years in the industry. So it was almost on like a 5 or 10 year cycle, it seemed like. I'm even surprised I was able to last that whole cycle all the way through as long as I did. Went through many periods where we had to lay off technical people.
Were there any layoffs around 1970, 1971 that you specifically remember?
No, I don't specifically remember. Everybody downsized in people probably in 57 and 58. And they probably kept key people around that were knowledgeable, anticipating the market was going to change. And we downsized because the Air Force changed their approach to purchasing airplanes versus rockets. So, and as a result, we were not in rockets. We got into them later, but not for many years. So there was a weak period there in that period of time. It was not a good time in the industry. There might have been a good year, one good year or something like that, but most of them were not good.
If he was in metals R&D, where do you think he would be located? Were there hotbeds like obviously Columbus, Ohio, or
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio, and in Pittsburgh area, and the other major one was TIMET, which was they had some labs in Nevada, and they had some in New Jersey. They had a processing mill, yeah, also in Ohio. But probably most of the research work was done out in Nevada, just south of Las Vegas.
do you think mining could be a potential source for some of the particles on the tie?
Probably not, because it probably, if anything, it would be full oxides at that time. And that would be easy. I noticed, I think there was one number there that looked like a titanium oxide that was found, but that was just one small one somewhere in there. No, there's no way that they would be picking up titanium itself at those places. They were in the mining of it. It's all oxides, and I noticed there are quite a few oxides in there. I think calcium and other things like that.
All right. This one's a little tricky, so here we go. On one of the stubs that was taken from the tie, there are 14 particles that have roughly the same composition. And that composition is 40% iron, 15% copper, 14% barium, 8% antimony, 6% titanium, 5% sulfur, 4% silicon, 2% aluminum, and 0% oxygen. Any suggestions on what this may have been?
I have no idea what that could be. That doesn't sound a bit familiar. Uh, that's not a market we had for supplying titanium.
Why why would there be so many different elements in it?
I don't know, because you'd have to look at what the application was, and I have no idea um, what that would be used for. I couldn't even predict the properties on something like that.
All right. Okay, there's a particle on the tie with 94% titanium, 4% gold, and 2% aluminum. Any thoughts on gold and titanium being found together?
You know, I have never seen anything even made that way. You know, gold was not used in any way that I can recall, unless some jeweler was. Titanium later on was used in the jewelry field. My watch is made out of titanium and things like that. But that was much later. They weren't doing those kind of things at that time. And so you might have a gold plate somewhere on that. But I can't, at that time, I don't think anybody was playing around with that type of composition.
By the way, I am absolutely shocked that you have a titanium watch.
I got titanium glasses too. Yeah. Well, there's a good reason for it. So it's just not a novelty, because in Europe, if you have stainless steel, in Northern Europe, many people are allergic. Their skin is to the nickel in this stainless steel. Titanium will not do that, and also the titanium is half the weight of the stainless steel watch, and so we've been making titanium watches since the 80s.
All right. There were 200 particles where titanium was the number one element and iron was the number two element. How common a pairing is that?
That would be that titanium ferro industry that I mentioned, that where they produced an alloy that could be melted with steel to add titanium to steel. They only added a small amount of titanium to steel to get certain properties. but they used what they call a master alloy, and it was iron titanium. And that's where they would take a lot of titanium scrap went into that type of product and melted it in crucibles with iron and titanium, and then it would be crushed into particles and sent to the steel industry.
In 100 particles, titanium was number one and palladium was number two. Any thoughts on that?
There was eventually an alloy developed with titanium palladium. And the palladium was added to titanium because it improved corrosion resistance of titanium. And but I'm not sure that was done that early. Because that would be used in the chemical market applications. And I think they came later, most of those, but that's the only place that I know of palladium being used. They use platinum, they use palladium, palladium. You said palladium, PD, I think.
Correct.
And okay, yeah. So I don't think it was really used at that time for that purpose, but it wasn't long after that. But I may be wrong on the years. So there may have been some playing with it at that time to improve corrosion resistance of titanium. There was a lot of research on how to use titanium. And titanium is in the chemical industry because of good corrosion resistance. And certain chemicals, you put palladium in titanium, improves the corrosion resistance of the titanium, and no other metal will stand up to that environment then. So, but that could have been started in that area, and somebody could have been trying to develop it.
If Crucible Steel Corporation controlled almost every titanium alloy patent in the 1960s, would other companies be researching with the same titanium alloy ratios already covered by patents, perhaps to improve upon existing alloys, challenge a patent, or trying to get around paying royalties? Or would that not be wise use of R&D funds versus just paying the royalties?
Yeah, there were very few royalties paid in the titanium industry, and I sort of disagree with the comment that Remco had a lot of patents on alloys that were useful. And I can only think of one that was used for a short period of time. And it's something we had no interest in producing because it was difficult to produce and it didn't last long. But the major alloy was 6 aluminum 4 vanadium, as I mentioned, was 95% of the market. And the people that, and it still is. So it was a good alloy in the beginning, and then it still is. And government money went into developing that alloy, so anybody could produce it. So, and the other material that was commonly used is pure titanium, and you can't get a patent on the pure metal itself. So Crucible didn't have a dominant effect in that area. Now, what they did at Battelle in the 50s, they started adding everything to titanium, trying to develop a wide titanium patent structure. They saw titanium coming on. They wanted to put every element in it and find a property that it improved and then go for a patent for it. And but I don't think they ever got anything out of all that work from a standpoint of royalties. I don't remember paying any royalties to anybody during that period of time.
That's very interesting. All right, Stan, what types of workers in the 1960s would be wearing ties and be around many different element weightings of oxygen-free titanium particles?
Well, it would have to be management type people that had responsibilities in that area. It wouldn't be the people working with it, hands-on type of people, but people passing by or had responsibility for the areas. So we had, I'm pretty sure it worked that way, the same way in our plant. Some of the engineers wore ties, but nobody else that worked for them did. So,
if you had to make a bet right now where this tie came from, what are you putting your money on?
I'm a little puzzled yet by it, but I read the write-up on the rim crew man, and something like that is possible. His interest, I don't think, was in there that he worked for DuPont, which made titanium dioxide, and he then maybe didn't work for him. He worked for a company DuPont owned, which was Remington Arms. And then he went to Rim Crew, I think, and went to Crucible Steel, excuse me. So he, I think it would be something like that. It could have been our lab, but I can guarantee you that nothing there looks like anything we did. And Crucible Steel, Columbus, the Battelle Memorial Institute did a lot of work. TIMET did a lot of work in this area. So those were the primary ones. There were some others that did a little bit here and there, but that would have done serious work on many different alloys.
Do you think DB Cooper survived his jump out of the plane?
Well, I don't feel I'm an expert at analyzing that. But I would say that he had to be pretty good at parachutes, and I question that, but he apparently was knowledgeable because he asked for 3 or 4, I think. So he knew something about parachutes, I wonder, I probably believe he didn't survive. Also because money was found down on the Columbia River, I think, later on. So something didn't survive. The money didn't survive somehow.
If someone much smarter than me has a question about Ti particles or titanium, is there somewhere that they could reach out to you?
Yeah, I don't want to get too, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I'm in retirement, don't forget. And I'm doing other things at this time. I have some other responsibilities. But I don't mind being involved in the peripheral of it for a small amount of time.
All right, that sounds good. Did you have anything you wanted to promote, Stan?
Not really.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for coming on to talk to us.
Buy a titanium watch.
Buy titanium.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, Stan. I really appreciate it. If you have questions or comments for Stan, you can send them our way and we'll forward them to Stan for you. If you have questions, comments, theories, or you know who DB Cooper was, hit us up. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, or email us, dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. We've got links for it all in the show notes. Thank you to Stan Seagle for educating us about titanium R&D. Thank you to Russell Colbert for educating us about advanced D&D. Thank you to Darren Osadich for letting us play his music. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
About a man many years ago, hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. Lights are burning and a cigarette. He's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Roll up in his coat-filled tie. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed, no one knows. But from his tale, a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked, he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. Just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. down to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. He walked in, he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat. He told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared. And from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years, the secret's out. The story has been told. D.B. Cooper's done running now. He was 80